All right. So welcome everyone to the Operate Framework Lifecycle Manager, specifically upstream meeting, feature upstream meeting. Today is October the 21st. And we will begin with look at the agenda to see what we have today. We're actually having 4 different topics for today. And actually there's another topic by Chris that's scheduled for the next meeting, which is surprising. So we may actually want to ask him why that is the case. You know, we can always discuss everything today, and if we don't have time, we can push it to next meeting. But
I think it's just because Chris is not here this week.
I think that
he's like away from office. So
okay, wonderful. I see. So that's why he puts the next thing. That's totally fine. We have 4 minutes for topic today, so that probably gonna fill up our entire time anyway. So that's so good. So the first item is supposed to be about the webhook situation that we want to discuss about from Joe, but Joe is not here yet. So why don't we move down to the second topic, and for now from Frederick on the optional manifest. Frederick, are you here?
Yes,
I can see you here.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So why don't you get started with that topic? Are you ready?
Okay. Yeah,
cool.
sure.
Go ahead.
All right. So brief overview. So that's about making manifests. So, you know, as part of a bundle, you can provide manifests, for instance, for service monitor or virtual pod autoscaler is another one. And this manifest gets created together with the operator at the installation time. One challenge with that is in the case of pod monitor, service monitor, or virtual pod autoscaling. These are not core objects of Kubernetes. It means that they may exist on some cluster and may not exist on other cluster. And a consequence of that is when the API doesn't exist for the manifest, the install plan fails. But if you look at the service monitor or virtual pod autoscaler, there are features that are actually not core to the operator mechanisms. I mean, they are nice to have in a sense. And the idea of this proposal is that for this nice to have, the install plan wouldn't fail if the API is not available on the target cluster. So now I think we had a few discussions with the team and on the GitHub pull request, and there are a few things where we need to decide. And so the main one is to understand, is it a use case that we want? And by that, I mean, there are different ways of looking at that. So the first way of looking at it is, do we want to have individual resources that are part of the manifest directory of a bundle to have them optional? Or is it that we say when we install a bundle, you should always get the same results in terms of installation of the operator? So yeah, so if someone has an opinion on this first point, if you see that it's a valid use case to have optional resources, or you think that a bundle installation should always give the same outcome, independent on the target environment.
So I think I want to start by saying I think conceptually this idea makes sense. Like it stands to reason to me, especially with the idea that we're going to start moving further and further towards a bundle format where the contents of the manifests that we're applying are just raw cube manifests, and we don't have any abstractions around applying additional manifests on top. It makes sense if we're going to support, like, you can put whatever manifest you want in the bundle, to be able to have additional controls where certain manifests can be marked as optionally applied. Like, I just think that seems like a reasonable thing for us to try to do. So I made a couple of comments in the enhancement proposal, and mostly around the packaging format bits. So I don't know if we want to go into that, start there, or if there's any other comments we want to kind of go over first, because in my mind, that's really kind of the only obvious outstanding question I sort of see and have with the proposal.
Yeah, I'm happy to go into this direction, but before that, I would like to ask one more question. Is at the end of the day, the install plan is failing because the API is missing. Yeah, so because the service monitor API is not installed, so there is no CRDs for service monitor that has been created, or same for virtual pod autoscaler. I believe there is a value on not limiting that at the API thing, saying that it is the manifest itself, that it can be specified as optional or not. But that's an open question, so I'm happy to get your opinion on that. I believe I know Kevin's opinion, but if others want to give theirs, I'm happy to hear that. No. Okay, so I think, I mean, I think Kevin, you're okay with seeing the option to specify manifest as optional directly. So the next thing, in my opinion, is the way I have written the enhancements proposal is for the operator author to decide these things are optional from my point of view, and I believe that's important information. But one other aspect, and something that I didn't cover, is to say, is that only operator author decision, or do we want to give also the opportunity to the cluster administrator to decide, okay, I want to have this manifest as optional, meaning that I'm okay with the insert plan going on, or I want the insert plan to fail if this dependency is not available. So what's your opinion on that?
So my opinion is the fact the bundle is been designed, been packaged by the author, so to speak here. So ultimately, they are the one put whatever resources manifest that they need for their operator to functioning properly into the bundle image. And it's up to them to know if this specific manifest is optional or not. That's something the cluster admin may not know, may not be aware. So I don't see the value of having the cluster admin to knowing this kind of things. And in the cluster, they can so many version of an operator, so many operator for that matter as well. So to be controlling which one is optional for the specific manifest in the specific bundle is not realistic or practical. That's something the bundle author need to decide. And knowing, the important thing is knowing that if for whatever reason this manifest cannot be applied in the cluster, it will not break the operator functionality by any means, then they can mark it optional, obviously. But if it needed for the operator to be functional, then obviously, for whatever reason, that specific manifest failed to apply, then the failure for the entire operator is expected, right?
Yeah.
Can I make a counterpoint? So I think I agree. Like, I think it makes sense that, like, from the perspective of the user, like from the administrator, like in most cases today, at least with the way OLM works and exposes most of this, there's no reason why a cluster administrator probably would even have the context to answer the question of, like, should this specific manifest be optional or not. But one of the things that I think we've been talking about and starting to explore more and more is, well, if you think about conceptually why a manifest would be considered optional or not in a bundle, I think the by far the biggest driver for why a manifest could be optional is because applying that manifest in some way adds some feature to the operator that is not required for the operator to run, but is something that, if applied, adds some kind of functionality or mechanism to the operator in some way, right? So if that's the case, we're also separately having a discussion in OLM about this concept of feature binding and, like, feature toggling, right? That, like, there could be some first-class concept baked into the operator that either enables or disables a feature that the operator can or can't do. It feels to me like there's some relationship between deciding whether or not to optionally enable some manifests as it relates to a feature of the bundle or a feature of the operator, that I think at some point, and maybe I don't think we need to start with this, but at some point we probably want to think about how feature binding relates to enabling some optional manifest. And if you are explicitly enabling that feature and the operator can't be installed with that feature because that API is not available on the cluster, then the cluster administrator probably needs to know that, like, oh, hey, I need this feature enabled for this operator, or the operator is pointless to me. So have a control, some kind of property that prevents the operator from getting installed. That feels like they're at least fairly related.
Yeah, I would agree on that, but I haven't read about feature bindings. So do you have a design or overview of what you have in mind with that, or something? Or is it possible for you to explain quickly how you see the design of this feature binding?
So there have been some sketches getting thrown around at various points in time. I think we're imagining that this is mostly solving a slightly different problem, which is more around how an administrator interacts with the RBAC that an operator does or doesn't need, depending on the context that it's running in. But you could imagine that basically, like, there's this sort of first-class concept of the feature that the operator provides as a resource, and the roles and the role bindings associated with that resource are templated out in a way where, when that feature is enabled, that RBAC optionally gets applied to the service account running the operator. This sort of ties into this whole, like, we have this idea, this notion of like having a management plane for controlling the RBAC that an operator is allowed to use. I think the first obvious example is in the context of, like, an operator might need some special permissions at install time, and then afterwards doesn't need those permissions anymore. Or another really common use case is, like, I only want this operator to be able to, like, in a globally scoped operator, I only want this operator to actually be able to do these things in this certain subset of namespaces. That's kind of the concept. I'd have to go dig around to see. I know that there was at one point a doc that I think Evan actually wrote down about how some of this could work. I know Nick was also involved in coming up with some of those designs, but none of this is like, we don't have an enhanced proposal. None of this is like anything further than sort of like high level sketches.
Okay. Yeah, I think in regard of RBAC, you know, you would have exactly the same scenario. So if you define in your bundle right allocation to a resource that doesn't exist on the cluster, the install plan will fail. So if you, for instance, give access to service monitor or something else that doesn't exist on the cluster, the install plan will fail in some way. So if you have an additional manifest, I can see that as being similar use cases. I'm not too sure of the things of having right at the install time and not needing them afterwards because of, you know, the reconciliation aspect. But yeah, that's something that is happening for everything with OLM. Okay, so I think for me, what's important out of this discussion is to understand the way forward. And I think the crux of these things is where do we want to make this specification possible? Do we want to have these optional attributes at the manifest level as I propose, or Kevin, you're proposing to have that at a different level, so in bundle properties, I believe. So that's why I was interested in feature binding. If you already had some design, you would have also similar requirement. You need to specify this feature binding at some level.
Yeah, so I just threw a doc into the chat that kind of goes into this sort of feature binding concept. Like I said, it's more of a sketch. There are some API concepts there, but there's not, you know, this is not something that we've gotten too much further than what's written down there.
Okay, all right, so I will do some reading on that later on. But yeah, so to come back and to finish, because I'm cautious of time on this discussion. So what is the way forward now for this specific use case? How do you see
that? So I don't know that we need, I don't know that we necessarily need to answer every single one of these questions in order to move forward with this specific proposal. I think that, to me, if we start with just defining a mechanism that allows the developers to assign some property to specific manifests that says, if these manifests can't be applied, then ignore them. I think that's a reasonable initial step forward, and we can always iterate on that more specifically. Like, I don't think that unless there's someone that can think of some reason why we're putting ourselves into a corner where we won't be able to walk back from that for some reason, or we would need to walk back from that for some reason. I'm pretty confident that we can mostly take this proposal as is. At least from my perspective, I think it's reasonable. Like I said, the only edge that I personally was considering was around the metadata question of, like, how do we apply metadata to a specific manifest in the context that we're in the bundle format, we're attempting to move all of the metadata about what is being installed into a separate metadata store in the bundle. But minus that conversation, I think it's relatively reasonable.
Okay. Any other input? And I mean, from other attendant.
I'm kind of thinking about, like, right now we have a check that in the install plan execution around whether an API exists. We go and check it for the GVK via the discovery client on the server. In this case, if the optional manifest is installed and the API isn't there, that check would fail, and we would basically not treat that as a terminal error. But there are some cases where there are some APIs that are deprecated and removed from the API server, and in that case, we would swallow that error. That seems like an edge case, but I'm just thinking it basically would follow the same code path, right? We would still use discovery to check. And then basically, so what I'm saying is that we have a code path right now that checks for APIs that aren't there for reasons that because the API has been removed and is no longer ever present. So if we use the same code path for APIs that were marked as optional, it sort of can mask that type of error, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Any further input or comment on this specific topic? Okay, then. So I guess we can move on to the next topics. And if anyone having any further input, comments, feel free to reach out to Frederick and also comment on the enhancement that currently standing on the enhancement repo. I'm sure Frederick can, answer any question that you may have or address any feedback that you may have for that particular enhancement. And let's move on to the next topic. So next topic, actually, I'm actually trying to find the other person, Joe and Eric, on the other two topics. It seems that they are not here. So I just get started with my. So I just want to bring a discussion real quick about a topic that we was discussing, I think, in the last meeting about constraints, essentially. So the idea behind that is basically providing a mechanism to specify certain cluster information that actually important during a resolution when the operator be installed. And it seemed the main feedback on the previous meeting, the fact that that enhancement may be a little bit too broad and it can be break down to some smaller enhancements. So that what I did, and now we're actually having two new enhancement, one for the generic constraint that I linked there in the number one, which is the PR91, and the other one is for the cluster constraint and property enhancement proposal, which is number two. That's the PR96 that you see on the link number two. So I just want to, it's been pushed up a little bit over a week ago. I'm not sure if anyone have the time to read it, but I want to make sure that this be published and be announced up on the meeting so everyone can have a chance to look into it. And for the generic constraint, that pretty much the same thing that you saw on the original enhancement already, with the syntax and the usage of the cell goal, the cell expression language to basically construct a new time name constraint that can be generic, that you can, at an author, operate author, you can design your own constraint and to rely on certain property that you want and specify expression that can be consumed by OM and deciding if that constraint is satisfiable or not. And I think everything pretty much remaining the same from the last meeting that we're talking about this, the syntax and the usage of it pretty remaining the same, just some minor changes on that, but nothing major on there. And I will try to put up another patch into the enhancement to explain a few more things in some of the syntax a little bit to make it a bit clearer, but there's nothing changing specifically about enhancement. So any feedback would be welcome. So feel free to put up there. And the second enhancement is the one that relatively newer and we didn't have the time to look into it or discuss a lot on previous meeting. This is the part where if the cluster having a specific constraint, a specific property that the cluster admin want to expose, how we can actually do so, what would be the mechanism for you to expose local information. And the original proposal from the previous enhancement was using a config map. And I think the main feedback from that specific original idea was the fact config map, even though it's a useful storage mechanism and it's already existing API that you can use right away, but the UX may not be the most friendly in a way that how you're supposed to query the information on that config map, because you need to know where that config map is in what specific namespace and even the name of it to even get that config map. And the feedback was maybe it's the better idea and more user friendly to actually having a brand new API for this, something that you can query using kubelet command and so on, and you can actually see the information from the resource that been returned by the cap command and see what would be the cluster constraint and property. So that's why in the second enhancement, I push up a CID for a new API. At the moment, I'm calling it constraint for the lacking of better naming convention here, but it's essentially CR cluster scope level CR that where you can specify constraint and property specifically for the cluster that you running. And this is something the cluster admin we need to do if they want to impose certain kind of constraint or property for the cluster. And constraint here is basically the application of the generic constraint on the other enhancement, the number 91 PR, that you can basically using a generic constraint here to apply to basically restrict certain bundle to be installed on a cluster based on a property that belongs to that specific bundle. So that would be the application for this constraint. And this can be one constraint, can be multiple constraints. And the other side of that is the properties. And property is just similar to how you specify GVK and package property on the bundle. But for this specific case, you can have any type of property you want, as long as it's fitting into the typical property syntax we have, which is basically a type and a value. And this kind of properties information is something the bundle can rely on. If they want to depend on this property, they want to using the property to ensuring that their operator can be installed correctly, can be functioning properly on the cluster, so they can depending on that property as well using the generic constraint for their own bundle operator. And of course, in enhancement, I'm having some example and more information on that specific area, but that is the main information and the main statement for this specific enhancement. And that's obviously pretty new, so I'm not sure if anyone had the time to look into it yet, but I just want to bring it up and discuss real quick for anyone to bring to you guys' attention, and welcome any feedback on the enhancement, and I will address any question and feedback either in this meeting for the time that we have left and on any later comment on the PR as well. So now I'm open up the discussion if anyone have any question or discussion they want to talk about.
I didn't have anything specific, but I did sort of optimistically put these 3 enhancements as topics for the next call. so that it seems like we can have a deadline for when we plan to have all the feedback in and decide whether or not they need more discussion or not next time around.
Yeah, absolutely. My main goal here basically just brought up the 2 PR that I just mentioned, especially the second PR, the one that I just give a brief introduction, so to speak, because that one is new compared to the other one that we didn't have time to talk about. And there's no pressure to discuss this today. I want to make sure everyone aware of that and put some comment, give it some thought on the enhancement and let it kind of soaking a little bit, and then prepare for any kind of discussion that may be coming up in the next meeting. And I will make sure we're having a topic for the first one and also the second one for the next meeting, for sure. So it seems like there's no immediate discussion we want to talk about, so we can move on to the next item if we want to. So the next one would be Eric on the compound dependency constraint EP. Eric, are you here?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead, Eric.
Thanks. I submitted this enhancement earlier this week. It's gotten a few comments on it. Feel free to take a look when you get a chance. It's effectively, it's actually quite a simple enhancement because it's only building upon some prior constraints that were defined that OLM understands and resolves, the GBK and package constraints. And it also talks a little bit more formally about the difference between a property and a constraint, because it's not a two-way relationship necessarily. It's not core to the enhancement. It's more just like, this is going to be something that we're talking about quite a bit going forward. Like, what is a property? What is a constraint? So I figured to like delineate those two things would be nice in the context of that EP. The 3 additional constraints are all, any, and none. So it's like and or not, disjunction, conjunction, and negation across one or more GBK or package constraints, or you can nest them. And this lends a lot of power to the user to define like groupings of constraints that it can require, or optional, like a set of different options that you can use, such as different versions of an API. Right now, there's no way to do that necessarily. So your bundle, like if you specify any of these versions of this particular API, can be installed more flexibly in a cluster. Oftentimes, operators can depend on different versions from what I've seen, and a lot of versions can be, compatible with each other to a degree. It's just, you can now explicitly specify that you can do that. You can also say, like, I never want to use this particular version with a none clause. And that will inform OLM's resolver to, I guess, remove any resolution results that would potentially have that API version. So those are just some examples. There are a few more in EP. I encourage you to take a look. I didn't want to dive too much into discussion in this call, because that should be happening on the EP. But if you have any like higher level questions, feel free to ask. Cool. I'll take that as a no. That's all from me.
Thank you, Eric. As Eric already said, please take a look at his his enhancement on the repo and put any common feedbacks meeting in the enhancement PR, and Eric will answer the question you may have. And potentially, we're gonna having a dedicated time on the next meeting to discuss this further if anyone wants to having a more broader discussion as well. That's absolutely possible. So that should be the end of that topic, and let's move on to the first topic from Joe. Just give me one quick second. On the webhook conversion. Joe, are you here?
I am.
So wonderful. So Joe here. So go ahead, Joe.
So I don't have the agenda up. Is this the thing about how when you uninstall an operator, you end up messing up the GC controller?
No, this is on the operator discussing status. I'm sorry, operator uninstall when the operator including conversion webhook broke the cluster.
Yeah, that's the same thing. So
okay, go ahead.
So basically, we have this problem right now where if you have a conversion webhook running in the same process as the controller that's reconciling your API, and you then go and delete the controller, uninstall it without also uninstalling the CRD, then the webhook, the CRD is still configured with that webhook. And when the garbage collection controller tries to make requests for all of the kinds across, for all of the objects across all the kinds in the cluster, it eventually gets to this CRD. And when it makes a request, the API server says, oh, I see that you've got a webhook configured. Let me go and make the conversion request from your webhook. And then the webhook's not running. And an error is returned to the garbage collection controller. So the result is that the garbage collection controller just stops working for all the kinds across the entire cluster, like no more garbage collection, period. So we think that we need to do something to help solve this problem. And, it's basically like a foot gun, right? Like it's really easy to build something with KubeBuilder and Operator SDK and OLM that results in this situation because that's kind of the direction that all of those tools push you. APIs and the controllers all in the same bundle, and then for the controllers and the webhooks to all run within the same deployment. So there's really no way to avoid this unless you specifically know that this is a problem and specifically break things out after KubeBuilder or Operator SDK has put these things together. And then even then, you still have to, like from OLM's perspective, you still have to separate the API bits and the webhook deployments from the controller deployments into separate bundles and CSVs. Because at the end of the day, if the CSV owns two different deployments, one for the webhooks and one for the controllers, if you delete the CSV, you still have the same problem. So this actually gets back to a topic we discussed a long time ago that I think I was initially pretty hesitant about. But we've been kind of talking about like, well, do we need to decouple APIs from controllers? So the APIs have like one bundle that they're delivered in, and then controllers have a separate bundle that they're delivered in that then declare dependencies on that API. So I think that's kind of the gist of the problem and kind of where we're thinking. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that or anyone wants to expand on it.
So Joe, I know you and I have talked about this quite a bit. I just would like to plus one. Like it seems like functionally we need to like actively start thinking about what separating APIs from controllers looks like. Maybe they have separate bundle. At the very least, it seems like they need to be life cycled separately in some way. Like if we want to ever be able to properly support conversion webhooks, I don't see a way around that.
I'm less familiar with the problem here. Is there a write-up of it in an issue, or it's not like, is this something that reasonably would be a GC controller bug? I'm not sure I fully understand the issue.
So the TLDR on the GC controller is making an attempt to get all objects from the entire cluster and when it does that, it's expecting to be able to resolve every single resource. If the conversion webhook is configured on a resource and that conversion webhook is not available, then you'll get an error when attempting to actually pull that resource. And at that point, the garbage collection controller says, I don't know, I'm going to wait until that's available. And eventually that just leads to the whole thing timing out and the garbage collection controller just sitting and waiting until it can start resolving things again. And that is apparently entirely by design and expected. So there, I don't think that there's a path where the garbage collection controller is changed in a way where, you know, the configuration, the webhook is essentially ignored in that case. Like there just isn't a way around that.
Yeah, that's, I understand the problem now. I could have sworn that when an API was unavailable to the GC controller, it just didn't deal with any graph edges that involved that type and punted on those decisions. Is there an obvious reason that doesn't, I mean, I realize that this isn't API machinery. Is there, am I missing anything obvious, like why that's not an option?
I don't, off the top of my head, I do not know. I talked to Stefan about this and he seemed very confident that this is exactly how it's intended to function. So I don't know, like maybe we could go and talk to the upstream control plane group and see if they have any opinions or thoughts about this topic, but it seemed like the answer was this is by design.
Have we actually tried to recreate this problem yet and like extra confirm that like, yes, all GC stops? Because that surprised me as well. I kind of figured that what Evan described is how it would work or should work. Is it possible that like talking with Stefan, like we just got our wires crossed and we weren't talking about the same thing?
I have not personally attempted to recreate this specific issue, but they definitely had a whole write-up talking about adding alerting for this very specific problem in OpenShift.
Yeah, that's true.
So that leads me to believe that that's where this is. I could go try to see if I can dig that bit up. And like I said, we can definitely like try to go to the control plan folks upstream and see what they have to say. But that is still, that's my impression.
So I think like, so my plan right now at least is to, I've already initiated this conversation. In fact, I did it this morning with the Cube Builder and Controller Runtime community, where like all this kind of needs to start. Because right now, like when Cube Builder scaffolds a project, all of that stuff ends up in the same process. So until we solve that problem and get projects separating these things out, nothing that OLM is going to be able to do is going to solve it. So I started the conversation there. There's no issue yet for that, so I'll make an issue. And then I think it's probably still worth, like I know we talked to Stefan about this, but I think it's probably still worth making an issue against Kubernetes about the GC controller, just to get more perspectives about it and see if anyone else thinks that there should be a different way that this works.
I can drive the Cube Builder change. Just send me the issue number when it's done. Or when the issue has been created. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, we'll do. And Tim, to answer your question, I have not done that yet, I don't think. Actually, maybe I did. I'll go look for that. If I didn't, I'll make it.
All right, is there anything else we want to talk about in this topic? It seems like that's it from Joe. Is anyone else anything else? Assuming we will continue this conversation topic on the upstream, involving another upstream group as well. So that seems to be the way forward. And I think that pretty much it on the topic side on the agenda for today. Is anyone else have anything that they may want to talk about but didn't have time to put that on the agenda? I will take the silent no at the no, but just a quick note here. It seems like we were having a few things to discuss about on the next meeting, with 2 weeks away from today. So if anyone have anything else that they plan to talk about on that specific meeting, feel free to put in early so that we can know how many we're gonna have. So far, we actually only having 2 of them. And thank you, Evan, for put up topic for every single thing for next week. And I think that pretty much for today. So I think I'm gonna close out the meeting a bit early to give everyone about 10 minutes back to enjoying the rest of the day. And thank you everyone for coming, and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Thanks, Vu.
Right.